So as people come in, I was just thinking that we'll hear from each of our speakers kind of however you'd like to frame what some of the challenges have been, either for yourself, for other people in your community, what has come up. And, you know, here at Trauma Training Tuesday, we're always focusing on the impact of traumatic experiences. One of the pieces I think that is rarely talked about is how hard it is to parent. And especially if you did not have an amazing role model for parenting. Hi, Nikki. So glad to see you. Yay. We'll just give it a few more minutes. But Nikki, I was thinking we would start with you because you always set a tone of honesty and truth telling and just putting it out there. And that is certainly what we want to do with this program in general and in trauma. So I'll give it a little bit longer, but super excited to hear from our panelists. Welcome, everybody. Yay. We have that situation today where Dr. Ross, who is the usual host of the Zoom, is on vacation. So last time we had this happen, no, there was just not a Zoom host, and it was fine. It worked out fine. But just giving you that heads up that I do not, usually I have the power to mute people if they're, you know, kind of walked away and got loud or anything like that. And I do not have that power this time around. It worked. That's happened before and it was fine. So I'm sure that it will be all right. It really is so needed, so needed. Some of us that do like that Worcester Together group, and Louise has been one of the people, like we often make time for parent voice so that we're hearing from parents in our community as we start to think about emergency responses. And all along we've tried to do that, but I think that is not something that happens in many spaces. I think parents' voices are rarely heard. It's really hard as a parent to make your voice heard because of what it takes to sort of get in front of people that are going to listen, that are going to understand. And again, I think many people here now have been to Trauma Training Tuesday in the past, but if you haven't, we do record it, and there are agencies that use the recordings as some of their training. In the pandemic world, most agencies haven't done training because it takes coordination, it takes effort, it takes funding, and it's one of the first things to go. So having a space to talk about trauma and to do some training and learning from people with lived experience, I think is so valuable, and the value will go far beyond just those of us that are here today. So you're very appreciated for being here. I know around parenting was the first time I had that aha moment that lived experience is very different from things that you have learned in school, right? I think I've shared before, my very first job right out of high school was in a residential treatment center, right? So these were kids that had really challenging lives and circumstances and diagnoses. And I remember in that work, I was coordinating with a parent, and, I was an 18-year-old girl, and she said, "Are you a mother?" And I immediately felt defensive, right? And felt like, wow, I came back with something 18-year-old girlish, like, just because I don't have that experience doesn't mean I can't be helpful and supportive. We've all heard that one, right? But I did, because I felt that strong reaction come up. I reflected on the fact that, wow, parenting especially is something that if you're not a parent, you really don't understand what it's like. You really do need to walk in those shoes to recognize how hard it is. The other kind of story I tell about parenting is like having a child. I recognized sexism at a whole other level. I did not get how much our society is not set up to support women, especially in parenting. We know that we already, women are not making the same incomes as men. They're not having the same attainment of sort of power and influence that men are having. And because their parenting is a big part of some of that. And those things all kind of feed each other. I know in doing social justice work at the YW, people had looked at elected officials, and we know there's very few women in elected office, and when women are in elected office, they usually have waited until their children are adults before pursuing that, because we know that as women, we're expected to have the children be our primary responsibility, and we can do some other stuff when that's all done, but until then, that's our focus, and we internalize that. It's external, it's all around, but it's very real. The sort of political changes too seem to really lack the understanding that there's a lot to parenting. It's not just giving birth. It goes so much. We really kind of we do that in our culture a lot, right? We focus on the wedding, but not the marriage. We focus on giving birth, but not on raising children. And it's so incredibly hard. And if you have any of your own trauma, I did not know this, but as you're watching your child at the ages you were, it's very flashback inducing. It really does take you back to your own childhood in ways that can feel pretty scary, especially if you don't see it coming. And I am thrilled today to have my friend Nikki Bell, who is incredible in so many ways. And really, if you don't know Nikki, just do an internet search and you'll see how incredible she is. But what Nikki's been so good at all along has been telling her story and being honest and letting people know that this isn't just her story. Many people have this story and their voices haven't been heard at all. She's centered the voices of survivors of abuse, exploitation, and that has been so valuable for our community. I think everyone in our region has heard about Nikki's work and has seen evidence that it's the most important stuff we can do. When if we care about social justice and creating a culture that everyone's included and gets to live their best life, then we really need to look at the people we're marginalizing. That sort of belief that anything we do to bring people from the margins into the center is good for everybody. It doesn't harm people that have power to support people that don't. It might feel like it, but that's just a temporary feeling and not the reality. So so all of my speakers are here. Yay. I was thinking, well, Nikki, start with you, and then Louise, do you want to go next? And then Christi, and then Wairimu. I was kind of just thinking, I'm not sure what each person is going to talk about. You are free to talk about anything that comes up for you in this topic, thinking about the challenges of parenting because of the social conditions, your personal, whatever, everything is grist for the mill. And we'll just kind of hear from people and then see how our audience feels and what kinds of things they might want to raise and lift. And again, if you're not speaking, everybody has already done it. You can mute yourself. That'd be great because nobody is host, so nobody has the power to do that. And I am going to mute myself and turn it on over to Nikki. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Amy, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you to Christi and Joanne being here and Louise to be here to kind of talk about our different experiences parenting. and having experienced trauma. My name is Nikki Bell. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Living in Freedom Together, or an organization called LIFT. But more importantly, I am a mother to 2 young children, one in the Worcester Public Schools, about to be 6-year-old in a couple of weeks, a 2-year-old daughter, a woman in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't used drugs and alcohol in almost 8.5 years now, and also a survivor of many forms of gender-based violence, including sex trafficking and prostitution. And so, I also am a woman that has experienced child removal as well, just to kind of help people understand. So, for me, when this topic was raised, I was like, God, like, I thought of some specific instances that I really struggled because, as we know, trauma comes back as a reaction, and my reaction to my children, right, was not what I'd wanted it to be in that moment, right? But also just this recognition that, it's not one instance where trauma, I think people have this idea that it's like, oh, this trauma response or this trauma reaction that happens one time and then we all move on with our days, right? But the reality is trauma is insidious. And for me, it affects every aspect of who I am, from the relationships that I have, from how I do my work, to how I have a relationship with my husband, to how I parent my children, to how I experience my pregnancies, to how I interact with my children's teachers and social connections, right? And so, I thought I'd just give a little bit of some of the key areas that I thought I would like to bring to this discussion, and then hear how, others experience that. Because I do recognize that though I grew up in poverty, though I have substance use, though I didn't have access, that I also still come now from a privileged space that other people may experience things. Other people do experience things very differently, and have not had access to the same things that I have in my parenting journey. And so just want to be cognizant and recognize that right out in the forefront. And so, I think back to, even just my pregnancy and the stigma that I faced because of my substance use disorder, and how oftentimes these social systems that are, I don't want to say designed to support people struggling with their children, because, I'll just call it the child regulation system, right? And how that system was supposed to be there as a support, but ended up just layering on and piling on more trauma for me and my kids. I'm a person that uses medication to treat my substance use disorder, which is a medical condition, and that is actually how we successfully treat substance use disorder. And I remember having my 5-year-old son, and at this point I had founded a successful organization and had actually opened a residential treatment program that was funded through the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services. And yet the hospital who was caring for me still filed an abuse and neglect charge against me, right? Because I took medication to treat my medical condition, right? Substance use disorder is one of the only medical conditions that we really criminalize and penalize people for getting medical care for. And, the woman comes in and I'm being assured by everybody that, things are going to be fine. And, they're going to screen this out because there's no concerns for everybody. And twice with my 6-year-old son, they screened it in for further investigation. And with my 2-year-old daughter, 5 years later, they also screened it in for investigation. And one of the things that I kept trying to express to the investigator from DCF is just at the time, my daughter, I'll just speak to my second daughter, she was born 10 weeks early. So, I already had a really traumatizing experience giving birth to her. I had an emergency cesarean section after a significant bleed. And I was worried about her health and well-being. And I'm trying to care for her while also knowing that my son is at home with his father, and trying to balance all of that while also then trying to manage the investigation process that had been heaped upon me. Because, in other, realms, and I'll say outside of the United States, because we don't do a great job of this, we have women give birth and then send them packing and say, you'll be great. But, and it was the middle of COVID. Yep. So I wasn't able to have access to support and things like that. I was hospitalized for about 7 weeks prior to delivering my daughter. And I remember my doctor saying, hey, she just wants to go off the floor and see her husband, her son, and her dog. And the nurse's response was, well, if she's going to do that, she's going to need to take a drug test every time she returns to the floor. And it was like, so we're trying to balance my mental health and my need for medical care here. And so I said, fine, I'll do whatever you ask me to. That's a significant waste of money and resources for you, but happy to, right? But just the idea that I knew that everybody was looking at me, waiting, like I must be going outside to meet my drug dealer, right? I couldn't possibly want to see my kid or my dog. I mean, who would want to do that, right? And so just like the struggles and how the hospital and the systems viewed me, right? And how that still impacts my life today. They opened a full investigation. They sent an investigator over to my child's daycare to interview my 3.5-year-old son because, they probably thought he was going to disclose that I was smoking crack cocaine or something. Little did they know, they learned that he loves dinosaurs and his best friend is his dog named Moyo. So lots of helpful information. And again, a really valid use of resources, but just thinking about that whole process, right? So I give birth after a really traumatizing experience. They notify DCF. I'm told that I have to comply with this investigation. Meeting with DCF up at the hospital. They're also invading my personal space and my home and my family. And then the whole time I'm worried that when I go back up to the NICU, they're going to tell me that they've taken custody of my daughter and I'm going to lose her, right? Or that my husband's going to go try to pick up my son from daycare and he's going to be in DCF custody and we're not going to be able to take him home. And though they continued to say, don't worry, that's not going to happen, I had previous experience that demonstrated that that was very possible and real. It had already happened before, right? And so just this idea that we can just assure, oh, don't worry about that. We wouldn't do that. Yes, you would, and you have, right? And so, I constantly struggle with this constant fear. I mean, recently my 2-year-old daughter took a fall down the stairs, right? And, she went all the way head first down a full flight of stairs. She's a 2-year-old, 2-year-olds fall. It happens. She wiggled through the baby gate, but I'm standing there looking at my daughter who's like vomiting on the floor after smashing her head and weighing out, does she really need medical care? Right? Because the reality is if I bring her to the hospital, they may think I might have been high and take my daughter. Right? And it's like, and like not thinking about these interactions that people have with systems early on that then carry over and impact the way that they parent for their whole life, right? And so, I just mentioned some systemic components, but also just, the way children behave in general can trigger trauma, right? And an experience for this that I can mention is, when my son was 3 years old, right? He's 3, he's a toddler. I'm telling him, no, stop it, right? Stop pulling my hair. Sebastian, I'm going to ask again, stop pulling my hair. Sebastian, don't hit me, right? And he's 3, right? Like he thinks we're playing. I'm not experiencing that way, right? What I am experiencing is this consistent violation of my boundaries that I'm trying to create to make myself feel safe and in control, right? He's not understanding that, right? And so I end up having to close the baby gate at the top of the stairs and call my husband and say, you really need to come home and take care of your son because I can't do it right now, right? And I remember feeling so guilty in that moment, wow, my kid's standing at the top of the stairs screaming and wants me to come back and get him, which was only making me more anxious and reactive, right? And knowing that the best thing in that moment was to step away from him. But also then we're so socially conditioned that we should feel guilty and like we're doing something wrong. And it was like the option was like throwing him out a second floor window or taking a break, right? And going outside and smoking a cigarette and grounding and figuring out how I can like return to parenting, right? And so it's like we don't think about those normal interactions with children that, you know, for people with significant trauma can really cause like, you know, what other people would deem as excessive responses, right? And but for us are just kind of normal parts of our lives, you know. And when I had mentioned earlier that, you know, the system following me forever, I mean, you know, I've been in recovery for 8.5 years. I've had my entire criminal record vacated. I do not have one criminal conviction. And yet, you know, I had the application for the PTO come out and I was like, well, I'm not really a PTO person, but I would like to be involved in my child's education and be able to show up in meaningful ways for him, right? And so I applied and they denied me as a PTO volunteer. It is not because of my criminal record. It is because at one point in my life, I had a supported 51A filed against me. And so they used this supported 51A to say that I was unsafe to be around other children. And, you know, how does that, you know, make me feel, you know, as a parent? How does it make my son feel? And, you know, I, again, recognize I come to this from a position of privilege, but even, you know, when I was thinking about filling it out, it's like, I don't actually want the school to know about my history because God forbid I forget his glasses one day. And then they're like, oh, well, that lady, she's a drug addict. And, you know, we should probably notify DCF that they forgot her glasses, or, oh my God, she forgot his snack, right? Like, what a negligent mom, right? Instead of looking that like that happens with every parent and every kid, always, right? But just because of the experiences that I've had with trauma and substance use disorder in the system, you know, opening up that can of worms could have been very dangerous. And so, you know, though I applied, I also recognize, you know, my son goes to a dual language school, which predominantly serves children of kids of BIPOC kids, right? And how many of those parents that have been criminalized and systemically oppressed and, you know, are not even filling out the application because they don't want to open up that can of worms, right? And so, you know, even raising that to school committee members and others, it's like, oh, it was on our agenda 8 years ago. And it's like, okay, so I should count on this maybe like being looked at when he graduates. Like, so that's not super helpful. Like you are acting as a barrier from, and then it just creates this generational trauma, right? Where it's like, you know, I felt like my parents didn't show up for me. Now my son feels like I don't show up for him, right? And it's like, when do we end this cycle? And when do we listen to parents and actually prioritize what they're saying is important for them and their families, you know? And I don't want to take too much time. And I know I just talked about a bunch of random things, but I know that there's lots of other folks that have so much to add to this conversation. And so I'm just going to step back and give space to everybody else and feel like we can.
Thank you. There was so much in that. It's like so much to unpack. And I know it resonated for lots of people, just how much parenting feels like is all about judgment. You're just like pretty much constantly judged and constantly feeling guilty with little to no support. And Louise is up next. And I'm sure some of those things resonate for her and she'll have a whole bunch of new things. Louise, I met from Worcester together. And what I know about her is that she has done a lot of work and a lot of supporting other parents. She's really worked to not only, you know, take care of her community, but expand that and make sure people have a voice that don't have a voice, particularly women of color parenting. And, you know, Nikki mentioned it, Louise will say more. Race is always going to be a factor in how you're being looked at when you're parenting. We know that we live in a culture that does not give equal treatment to people around race, around gender, around orientation, around history. And that has an impact for people's daily lives. So Louise, thank you for being someone who's always willing to bring that voice, who cares about other people, and we're really grateful to be able to hear from you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in to hear my story as a parent, as a community leader, as the founder of the Good Street Project, which services the BIPOC community. I'm going to speak first as a parent because I myself has a son that suffers with mental health. And the trauma that I experienced from the experiences that he had to go through in getting help is unbelievable. He started in 2015 and um, a lot of us, we don't recognize the signs of mental health within our children because we think they're acting normal. And it started with him hanging out in his room, doing something that he normally did every day. So we didn't notice anything because one, he hung out in his room every day. He played his video games every day. He watched his normal TV shows every day. He did music. He had his people coming in, doing their music with them. He was performing in front of them.
Louise, for me, you just cut out. I don't know if other people couldn't hear you, but and it doesn't look like you're muted, but we can't hear you.
Indicating, but he's still doing the same things that he's doing. So we don't recognize the signs that there's something going on. He's changing. One day my son wakes up and he says, I have all this energy that I willed and I want to share it. And this energy was unbelievable. He was bouncing off of walls to the point to where we had to put him on blood pressure medication. And seeking help was the worst. There was no information out there for us. There was no resources out there for us. There was nowhere to turn. When you called 911, that was even worse than what you were already dealing with. Begging the police to help you, to just do something. You don't want to see other people get hurt in these situations, but to be looked at and laughed at by the ones that you call for help, that's traumatizing. So now what do? You have to seek things out on your own, and that was the worst. Being a parent seeking out help for my son. Nobody wants you to help because one, if your child's over 18, you can forget about it. The first thing they want you to do is go and take away your own child's rights as a human being, and you take control of that. Is that fair to your child to take away their rights? But this is what they want you to do in order to help your child. Then getting him into a hospital to get proper treatment. When they see you coming, you already, that the healthcare in the BIPOC community, we already have a strike. I fight every day. Every time I go for my healthcare, I have to ask to speak to somebody and I have to let them know that my life matters. It may not be to you, but in my health care matters. And I deserve to receive proper health care, just like anybody else that lives in this community. And that's another big issue that we deal with that causes trauma is receiving the poorest of health care. So, and that was another battle there as well. But after him being put into a facility, the trauma he received while receiving care in the facility is another issue. The things that they see. My son came home telling me that he saw another resident get sliced in the face by another resident. Now, there's more trauma there that he has to endure while he's trying to get his care. So, mental health, what I say, is real. It exists. The trauma behind it is real and it exists. And the one thing we need to do is support the parents that deal with children that deal with mental illness. We don't know where it stems from, but we know once it's there, it's there. And everyone deserves proper treatment and proper care for what, and especially done with love. I always say, if you cannot work in those kind of environments and treat the people with love and care, please don't take those positions. Please don't work those jobs, because it's so unfair. It's unfair to them because they're at a low state already. And for people to go in and mistreat them even more, that's even more trauma. So that's all I have to say about mental health and how I experience it within my family and the trauma that I know our BIPOC community deals with every day with mental health. And I just pray that we shine just a light on it, just a little light on it, and that we share that mental health is real, trauma is real, and people deal with it every day. And thank you so much for having me.
Louise, you brought up so many good points. I was looking to see if anybody from Parent Professional Advocacy League is here, and I didn't see them, but I know they did like a survey on how many parents felt blamed for their child's mental illness, and it was like 90 something percent. And I wish that surprised me, but I've seen that happen. I've seen exactly what you talk about, what Nikki talked about, where if you're seeking any help for your child, the assumption is always that you're the cause of the problems. There's not a strengths-based, asset-based, community-based mental health system in place now. It's very much focused on problems, and people and kids are problems, and how we're going to solve these problems. And there's very much value placed on professional knowledge that isn't placed on experiential knowledge, and that comes into play. So thank you. So I'm just sorry to know all that you've already had to go through. Do you want to say anything about what your agency does and the ways that people might be able to get in touch with you if that resonated and they would like to get some help?
Absolutely. So the Good Street Project, you can reach us at thegoodstreetproject.com, goodstreetproject@gmail.com. I'm sorry. And I don't have the phone number and everything here with me, but if you reach out to me, my email is louiseburrell59@gmail. I'll be glad to share the Good Street Project information with you. And what we do is we are here to service the BIPOC community. We are looking for a building. In a building, we can do more. But one of the biggest things that we have done in our community is attack mental health. Because our community suffers from it, and everybody wants to ignore us, but ignore the conditions that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So mental health is one thing that we've covered. We're also looking to cover our child's care, our adult care. We're just going to be community based. We have so many things. I don't have my notes and things here with me on what we do, but we're going to do a lot for the BIPOC community because there's nobody here supporting us. So I reach out to everyone on this call that's willing to support. We receive it from every angle that it comes.
Thank you so much. We're happy to do anything we can to amplify your good work. All right, Christi, your story is so painful and hard, and I really appreciate your willingness to share it, all you've already been through. And talking to you was one of my big aha moments of generational trauma within the Worcester Public Schools, right? Like when you're somebody who's been through the school system yourself, and now you have a child, add all the stigmas people have already laid out that are on you in the first place. And then when you bring that to the table, it doesn't go well, as you know. And so thank you so much for just being willing to talk about it, and for all that you've endured, and all of the women here today that are speaking. It's not lost on me how hard this is. And right? I've said, and I feel horrible saying it, but I never understood child abuse until I had a child. It's very easy to judge like from a distance. When you have a child, like Nikki said, it is so intense and triggering, and you feel alone and you're depleted, and it's you can't imagine it until you've been there. And it really is the hardest thing that gets no social support.
Well, thank you, Amy. And I want to thank Nicole, I think I said it right, and Louise for sharing that. And I can actually build on a lot of your stories because I wasn't sure how I was going to present this. And thank you, everybody who's joined in. So my name is Christi Berry. Maiden name is Wheeler. I grew up in Worcester. At a young age, I was in a traumatic sexual assault, removed from my home. I'm a 60s child, so I'm almost 60 this year. So there was no services. They didn't address sexual trauma. They just threw me in an orphanage. And I'm like, oh my God, I thought only bad girls go there. So now I'm thinking about all these children that are removed from homes, that they still hear that old stigma, only bad kids leave home and only bad kids do this. So there was no services back then. And I'll speak up now. DCF has done a lot more now in supportive services than they've ever done in my cycle. So I'm glad that they're making changes, but there's still a lot more that they have to do. So growing up, once I started transitioning into leaving school at 4th grade, I was actually one of the first students that interacted in what they started as special needs schools, because I'm legally dyslexic and I'm at the high end of dyslexia. I don't pronounce words the way that they should be. I don't read the way that they should, and I definitely don't write the way I should. However, I've conquered that, and I've got a master's degree, so I'm very proud of myself for that. So there is still.
I was going to throw that in as a bride, but just finished a master's degree at Clark University.
Yes, there is still hope that the systems are changing and there are services out there to help people like myself. I first learned how to read in a utility closet at Edward. It was Elizabeth Street School as they were building Belmont Street Community School. I grew up in Plumley. I am a product of whom I've hung around with. I know Louise's family very well, and I know you know who I am as well. I don't know Nikki though, but again, so yeah, I guess you would say I could have been like a really wild cat, so to speak. Like I had a mouth on me. You want to bring it? Let's fight. Like that's all I knew. Because I couldn't handle like, oh, Christi, can you read that? Like, oh my God, like, are you really embarrassing me like this? I can't read. Like, like humiliation. So, people make fun. What do you do? Punch them. Like, okay, so that's how you dealt with stuff because there was no services. There was no soft skills. There was nothing. So I had to find my way and navigate my way through life through Worcester. I lost a few pregnancies before I finally had my son. I had my son at 27. I was in the Navy. I moved on, at least got my GED, hated school, would have never told me I would go back to college. Never. Never saw it. Had Travis. I remember this young lady was probably 16, and I won't say her name, but they're screaming at her. And I was a high-risk pregnancy program. They're screaming at her. They won't give her any medication through her birth and said, oh, this is your 4th kid. I was like, excuse you? You're talking to her like that? She's like, man, we wouldn't do that to you, but we'll do that to her. And I was like, no, you won't. Not with her next to me, or you're going to have to move me somewhere else because she's asking you for medication. I don't care if she's had 8 kids. I don't care how old she is. You are rude. And I was horrified. I was like, this is how they treat you. And this is my first complete pregnancy. And they had to induce me and to put me in labor. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what are they going to do to me? Because again, I don't know how to ask questions. I'm 27. They're going at this girl for having multiple kids. She's screaming and she's already had multiple kids. By the time I was 3 centimeters, they kept me drugged through the whole thing because I was bouncing off the walls too. Because I was like, oh, no. So that was my first experience of just how they treat people. Just by your age, and they don't know if she was sexually assaulted, sexually trafficked. They don't know her story. They just know that she's contributing and having children. Okay, well, that's her choice. How dare you talk to her like that? That was one of my, wow, okay. So then I had my son. He was stuck in the birth canal. They prepped me for an emergency C-section. He was stuck so bad, they ripped him out. And I remember like, I don't hear him crying, and I'm looking, and one of my childhood friends was like this to my son's father. And I was like, what's wrong? And they were like, nothing. And they were like, here, hold your baby. And they wheeled me out. And then they took the baby from me. And I remember getting up, walking to the window. Because again, I'm 27. They think I know what a parent's like. You don't know. You get scared. Trust me. When I had to bring him home, I cried. I look for him. I don't find him. They're like, what are you doing? I run like a little 5-year-old back to my bed. Like, what am I doing? Looking for my own child. So they never told me that he was brought to ICU. There was a lot of things that later on in life I found out were wrong with my son. So I went back to work. Back then, he was born in 89. He had to go back to work after 6 weeks. So I went back to work, got him in a daycare. Daycare got early intervention right in his life. Still, nobody told me why. It took me until almost he was 5 years old to say, do you know why he's having all these problems? And I'm like, no. They're like, it was caused by birth. Go get his records. Magically, they disappeared. I have never, still to this day. And I went to the high pregnancy program 3 times a week through my entire pregnancy. Travis was a 9-pound baby. The best thing God gave me. Was glad, but was struggling. Didn't know how to deal with a special needs child. Didn't understand what that meant. Early intervention got me into preschool with him. He screamed, grabbed my leg, begged me every day, didn't want to go. No, like talk about detachment. You're like horrified. Like, how do you leave a kid somewhere they don't want to go? But you have to work. But even before then, now I'll talk about how Nikki talks about the system in DCF. So I was working giving parking tickets to the city of Worcester. Okay, so Travis had a lot of health problems. Yep, I always had these very good jobs. I was very fortunate for that. Authoritative jobs where I didn't really have to be a people person, I guess. And Travis had a lot of problems. So the daycare would call me every day, come get him. He can't breathe. He's not breathing right. At that time, I didn't even have a car. I was taking 2 buses to Great Brook Valley Health Center to get him treated. So, after a while, you lose a lot of jobs. DCF came into my life and said, there's a problem with your kid. You need to quit your job. And I'm like, I'm not quitting my job. Because again, for me, struggling with my own trauma, I needed to have my own identity. I needed to know that I could work, I could make my own money. I had some value. And that came from my childhood trauma. So that need for me to be an individual on top of a parent was because of my own trauma. And I didn't want that stigma of, oh, she's got to be on the system. So how dare DCF tell me, no, you can't work because your kid is sick and you're supposed to be at home or we're going to take your kid. I was like, the power of the pen. I've never seen the power of the pen, Nikki, and I can tell you plenty about how they use the power of the pen to whip me in check. But guess what? They've always lost. So they wrote a check that they couldn't cash. So there's still hope for you, Nikki. So don't let them intimidate you. So it went on. One time they called me from the daycare, said, oh my God, she's coming to the daycare. She's half asleep. She must be on drugs. I'm not, I drank, I'm responsible. I don't have a substance abuse. I have a partner in my life that struggles with substance abuse. I've known many people that do. So I haven't had that stigma, but I've had every other stigma. So DCF comes to the door again. I'm like, okay, would you go get a blood test? Sure. Went to go get a blood test. I found out I had a thyroid problem. So they call the daycare and say, she's not a drug addict. She's fallen asleep and having trouble getting up because she's got a thyroid. And they said to me, did you ever know you had a thyroid issue? And I was like, no. So now the daycare has to know that I got a thyroid. But now they're like, well, you know what? And I was just ending my job at the city. So I was like, she's like, well, how are you getting to work? And I was like, well, I'm not working. She said, well, I have to report it to the daycare. So now you lose your daycare slot. I'm like, oh, you lose your daycare slot, how you go find another job, right? So, of course, what does DCF say? If you'd like to do a voluntary leaving, I said, sure, you know what? I don't care. There you go, because I'm going back to work. Because this is me. Like, I have to, being a parent is hard when you got your own trauma. And like Nikki said, when you have to choose between telling your kid, like, yeah, I can't cope with this, and you need these outside services to help, and you still need your own identity and your self-worth. So I'm like, yep, okay, we'll do this. I had them for 6 months. Voluntary, it was fine. Kept my job, a daycare slot, ended up working at Department of Corrections up at MCI Shirley. Eventually didn't like behind the wall. moved on from there. Where did I go from there? I don't even remember. But anyway, so Travis is growing. We're getting him now in Edward Street daycare. Travis couldn't take his shirt off. He couldn't put his clothes on. Daycare would literally make him stand and ostracize him at the end because he couldn't take his shirt off. So he couldn't go participate with the other children until he learned how to take his shirt off, his coat off, and hang it up. So I went through so many different obstacles with a special needs kid that I still didn't even know what I was enduring. And I had no parenting skills from bouncing from foster home to foster home, trash bag to fit trash bag, choosing to sleep in the streets versus in foster care, and trying to be the best mom I knew how. I had siblings at 5. My one sister had 5 kids. She walked away from all of them. 2 of them got legally adopted. Another sister, they were both crack addicts and suffered in heroin. One had sexual trafficking and crack addiction and severe mental health. The other one's less. So the family dynamics of anybody really keeping a child at home, I was breaking the cycle. But I didn't have the skills. And I'm getting frustrated. So we're going through all this and we're trying to get, how are you leaving this kid outside? He can't take his shirt off. We're going to UMass. They're like, he struggles. And they identified him early. I was lucky, Louise, if they told me, this is a child that's going to end up suffering with mental health. There's no way around it. This kid, he should have been frustrated, acting out, fighting because he's trying to pull his shirt off and he can't. And they're pushing him to the side and they're leaving him to the side. They were like, whatever you're doing a great job. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not. I'm stressed out. I'm so stressed out trying to parent him and getting him services and trying to get these teachers to help come aboard. He needs extra help. Well, that's not what we're designed for. This is a daycare. Okay, well, where does it stop? Well, you need to stay home again. So again, here they go again. Well, maybe she's too, like my tone is too aggressive. Maybe she's abusive. Maybe she's done this to the child. So what did they do? Another 51A. So they sent me to the doctor's office, and Harry Babu at the time was Travis's pediatrician. He said, I'm telling you, Christi is very stressed out. She's high strung. She's very vocal. She is not abusing this child whatsoever. But like, she has to be. But like, no, she's not. But Travis was a kid that I had to take to the hospital all the time. He was vomiting profusely. He had migraines profusely. This is a kid that had to have IVs all the time. Like Nikki said, when your kid falls, what do? You take them to the hospital. They think you abuse them. They got to the point like, man, this is not a daycare center so you can go hang out on Friday and Saturday night. I was like, what? Now they're jamming IVs in him because he's dehydrated from constantly vomiting. I've got to call my father because I couldn't stand him crying. It's like, I'm sure parents, when you hear your kid cry, it just it goes right through. It's like talking like, and you feel helpless. I'm like, Dad, you got to go in there with them. And I'm pacing back and forth like until they get it all done. My son's like, Mommy, I'm sorry. I'm not doing nothing wrong. I said, Travis, you have to get IVs. So it was horrifying for me. So they decided that I was a mother by proxy. A munchkin. I was like, what's that? So Harry Babu put him in the hospital for failure to thrive. Wait, it gets, so I can tell you the system. Puts him in the hospital. The daycare's coming up there. They're asking me, do I want to spend the night? I'm like, nope, I didn't have a car. I'm walking from Hanneman Hospital to Lakeside after walking 8 hours a day, giving pocket tickets, okay, going back. They had a camera on me, unknowing to me. Travis lost 3 pounds under their care. That's how we found out he had a severe adenoid problem. And then they apologized to me. So again, I know how the system can be. If you're high strung, you can't cope. And my coping skills, I'm going to be the first one to tell you, they're horrible. They're better now, but back then they were horrible. So they automatically think it's us. That was the first time I was like, munchkin by proxy. You guys think I'm doing this to my child? They're like, yes, ma'am, we think you need attention like that. I was like, what? I am so stressed out. This is not what I need. I need a normal life, dropping your kid off at daycare, going to your job, like just normal parenting, like the normal children things that happen. I don't need this extra and beyond. I can't even cope with normal stuff. And you want to add things? You think I'm adding this to my plate? So this is part of how the system can re-trigger you, the voiceless. Even when you're telling the truth, they're telling you you're a liar. They don't believe you. The stigmatized. When Nikki was saying she wanted to go see her dog and go outside and see her husband, and they just assume that you're doing this. Then another time, we move on a few years. I fought with public school, knocking on doors. you can't get any help. Language is one of the most important things to know how to do. Well, I don't read well and I don't write well, and sometimes I don't speak well. But they kept saying, "Yup, okay, yup, we're doing something wrong, but we're not going to tell you how to write a complaint against us." So even when I was writing it, I wasn't wording it the proper way. And if you can't word something the proper way, you might as well just throw it in the trash. You're just spinning your wheels and you're not going to get the services. It took until my son was at Abby Kelly Foster School, chartered school, for me to start saying, okay, I'm tired of speaking. I'm going to bring in a therapist. I'm going to bring in a lawyer. I'm going to bring in this one. So I started crossing my T's, dotting my I's, and bringing in the force. Okay. They knew I was coming, but it still wasn't good enough. And then another situation arose where Travis stood up for his rights, denying me free and fair education. He became a product of his mother, hey, speak up. And needless to say, they told me to remove him. I removed him. Travis was like, I'm not going. Hands done. I'm popping the bottom of his shoe. His shoe goes flying. I take him out of the school because the teacher says, the principal, Doris Schroeder, if you don't get him out of the school, I'm going to arrest him. All I could see is my son was biracial. Oh, another way of putting another Black young man into the system. How dare you? Like, you're not taking my kid. So that's why I'm taking him. Get him out, come back to the school to talk to him. I ended up getting arrested for child abuse. Child abuse, they said that I threw my son to the ground, repeatedly kicked him and punched him in the face. Yeah. Because I filed a formal complaint with Department of Education with 5 violations of failure to provide free and fair education, failure to follow an IEP plan, failure to invite a mother to an IEP meeting, and 2 other charges. Proud to say, proved them all. Got the school for 85 civil rights violation of failure to provide free and fair education to a child of special needs. Yeah, had to go to jail for that. Didn't see that coming. So yeah, as you push, you better beware how fast they push. Now I'm going to speak real truth. And so the lawyer for Abby Kelly at that time was Carol Erskine, who was getting ready to be the juvenile judge. So it was like, we'll get her arrested. The kid gets taken. We'll get her to shop the charges. Boom, boom, boom. Well, guess what? That didn't work either. I must have had some angels, something, somewhere. I don't know how I got through that one because I didn't even see it coming. DCF came and said that they have never seen a case blown out of proportion to expedite a child into public school, no abuse, no neglect. But still had to go to court for 2 years. 2 years. Even when the judge knew, because I didn't have the money. We were a homeowner trying to hold it down. I didn't have the money for a good lawyer. I qualified for free lawyer. They should have dropped the charges right then and there. They should have said there is not substantial enough information. DCF cleared her to charge her with child abuse. Well, somehow, guess what? They still pushed it through. For 2 years, trying to make me plead. I said, I'm not pleading. Oh, Christi, you're a person either people like or they don't like. Oh, well, you're right. But I'm sure I'm not the only parent that has always had problems with the school system. So I'll take my chances. Okay? 2 years later, they decide to do no plead, no finding, and pretrial probation and put a code on my name so that I can't sue them. So when you talk about how the system, Amy, there's a lot to my life, how the system all works together, let me tell you, it is amazing how the strengths of the power of all these organizations that are supposed to be there to help us when we're crying, help, right? They want to help, but if they do, they lose their job. So we have to find ways to protect the people that are in these positions to help us so they don't lose their jobs. And break this vicious cycle of control, of oppression. Because again, they go in these jobs to be social workers because they really do care. They get burnt out. Teachers, they want to speak up, but they get gag orders. They've been told they can't do things, but nobody knows that unless you know certain components. So again, they're not all bad people. They're trying to hold down a mortgage, a house, and support their kids too. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's how we're all falling through the cracks. Does that make any sense? So I won with Abby Kelly. Travis had a great journey through Thorndike when he went to Thorndike. Belmont Street, Burncoat Middle School, did fantastic. I couldn't wait till he passed his MCAS to kind of flaunt it at Abby Kelly's face, like, ha, you thought you flunked my little child. No, my kid is still flourishing, unfortunately, and still trying to break the cycle. And then in my face, the cycle said, nope. And let me go back to the mental health part for Louise. So Abby Kelly, because Travis said, I hate my life. They used to make his life miserable. He had prescription glasses. They had them right there on their computer. I would write letters. Where's his prescription glasses? Nobody could find them. I go in the classroom, Nikki, and I find them right there on the teacher's desk. And I'm like, there's his glasses that I keep sending you letters and letters looking for, and you don't want to do anything. So again, the system can help create those barriers and make it worse. They talked about how I went to school in my pajamas. You know how many mothers drive their kids in pajamas and coffee, drinking, and get ready to do, like, again, but I was a horrible mother because I did it. Like, no, we all do it. Like, it's part of life. Okay. So I know I'm jumping. I'm not more organized. So I do apologize for that. But I guess I make it exciting. So then Abby Kelly sent him to mental health. We go down a wonderful Lake Ave, Department of Mental Health, because I have to go down there because I'm told. Now I'm stressed out. I'm bouncing off the walls. Boom, boom, boom. My husband's golfing. I got to track him down on the golf course to get him to come to UMass. He's like, you must be kidding me. There ain't nothing wrong with Travis. Why are you interrupting my golf game? I said, you're going to get your ass here because I have to come get you. It's not going to be nice. He finally gets there, right? And he's like, Christi, really? They really got him in here? And the doctor's like, sir, I'm worried about your wife. Do you think, she might be the problem? So my husband still jokes about this till this day. He said, maybe you want to sign her in. And Curtis is looking at me like, oh, I got the power of the pen, Christi. And I'm looking at him. And some of you who do know me are like, yeah. I said, Curtis, if you do, trust me, you will never, ever like me after that. But we still joke about that because I was so high strung from the stress of DMH. No hospital beds, no places to go. You don't understand what they're doing. They're filing 51As on you, and then they're trying to put you in the thing because you're frustrated and you don't have the tools. I don't know if that happened to you, Louise, but that happened to me. So needless to say, no, I didn't get committed, but it's a joke to this day about how when you get so hands-on and you get so pumped up, how they reverse it on you because they're not used to that. They don't understand that that's your trauma acting out. That's your skill level acting out. They don't see it that way. And you don't know how to articulate it. Well, I didn't at that time. I do now for my growth of education. But at the time I didn't. You're frustrated. You're powerless. And then there's no beds for these kids there's no beds. No beds. Like DMH needs to step up their game for some beds for these children. There are no beds. You have if you got a broke down car or no car and you're supposed to follow an ambulance for an hour and a half to Attleboro or somewhere, oh well, that's where you have to go. So they have to change the system, and and I know it's a huge system, but we need more beds in DMH. We need more services with parents that are stressed out because we feel hopeless. You're ripping our child from us. You're putting a child in an institution and we're in fear. We don't know what's going on. There is abuse in there. My son had braces. They popped the bracket off of him. Again, because of what they, again, it's hard. You don't know. You want to go up there to visit. No, kids can't have soda. They can't have coffee. They're weaned off all the things that they're used to having. So now they feel like mental health is a jail. They learn how to say that they're not going to hurt themselves. They learn how to come up with a safety plan. They learn this real quick because of how the system uses that. But then there's no beds to really give them services. Then you get them out, you get wraparound services, and they're like, oh no, it's a misunderstanding, they're fine. But they're already labeled. So again, mental health is huge, and mental health comes in all kinds of forms. Like I could notice my son's moodiness, and a lot of his problems came from being stuck in the birth canal. My problems came from a poor childhood. So you got those two skills. And I could remember, Nikki, when you said with your son up there, you had to decide which one. I used to tell my son at a very young age, right around my menstrual period, I get moody, don't touch me, and he'd always want to rub my leg. And I was like, Travis, please. no, you can't rub mommy's leg. And I'd have to explain it to him. And years later, one of the guys that was convicted, and he was juvenile, so he only got 6 months probation, Nikki, back then, because that's all they did. He came up, and my son actually knew who he was just from the stories of me talking about that, and me just trying to shield him from him. Because again, you're not getting up in my face, dude. You're not taking my power from me and then trying to traumatize my child. So I'm protecting, and my son said to me, that's the one that sexually assaulted you. That's why I can't rub your leg during certain times. And I'm like, yes. So again, it's the same thing, Nikki. It has nothing to do with substance abuse, parent abuse. It has to do with our trauma. And our trauma is so real that if we could just we want to heal, but society is so hard to let us heal. It's so toxic. And then the part that Amy was talking about, I was breaking the cycle. My son was going to be the first to graduate. He just, and then we got a knock on the door to tell me that my son was killed. And I was like, what? And I fell back. I was like, not my kid. My kid wasn't high risk for that. Nothing. But then the police used the fact that they diagnosed him as being bipolar. So he had a little bit of medicine, because autistic kids, as they're growing through puberty, they can't handle a lot of their body changing and stuff. And Travis was more of a slow grower. So he had just got diagnosed at 16 and a half for that. And they had him on the bare minimum of lithium and something else, because some other stuff went through his kidneys and wouldn't work. So just the fact that he had mental health medication, they said, oh, he must have laid down in the street. He must have done it to himself. Needless to say, that's an ongoing case. There's more to his case. It wasn't a simple hit and run. And that's what prompted me to start fighting for myself and taking my worth back, because I had to be his advocate, which we all do the best we can as parents with how many skills we have. But my love and the gift from him to teach me how to deal with systems and deal with the schools that I was horrified with dealing with forced me to say, you know what, I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to keep fighting. And in turn, fighting for him, I learned to fight back for me. And I learned to get a huge part of my soul back and my self-worth back, which I wasn't seeking. I was seeking more justice for Travis. So I was fortunate that things do change. So I don't want anybody to hear things aren't changing. They are. They're just not changing fast enough. So unfortunately, we didn't break the cycle, but even after Travis's death, 10 days later, he passed the MCAS the first time around. Go, Travis! So again, I still have that in my heart, but I still feel victimized by the system, still taking pieces, knocking on the doors, looking for the services that could have made his transition from schools a lot easier. And he was always mainstream. Travis was always mainstream. He was on the honor roll. He just couldn't. He had OT, PT, and speech, and he was going to have that up until he graduated high school. That's how severe a trauma to his head when he was caught in the birth canal. So again, we as a community, we know how to help one another step up IEP plans, but if we're too forceful, they don't want us. So even me, I have to find a balance. And again, we still have to advocate for mental health, because again, mental health can be caused by all kinds of stuff. Technically, I got mental health from my trauma. Okay. And when I get too off the top, I can identify, but the child can't identify their moods. They can't identify what they're feeling. And then when you go through puberty on top of it, you don't know if that's, your body racing because it's going through all these changes, or if it's a form of mental health. So parents shouldn't be expected to know this. We're not trained doctors. You go to the motor vehicle. I need this. Well, you don't know what you need? No, that's your job. That's your specialty. We're not supposed to know everything. We're not supposed to be doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, and everything else. We are supposed to be who we're designed to be and learn and help as much as we can. But the system still makes us feel bad. So that's basically, I'm trying to support everything from birth to childhood to school. But I will say I was fortunate to make allies after that arrest at Abby Kelly. And from then, I got more respect. from certain principals, and it made it a lot easier. And one thing that I still see that is a problem in Worcester is that people don't know how far they can push the schools back when they do out of school suspensions versus in school. If you know the power and how much you can push back, and those kids will be in school versus out school. And we have to start empowering the community of soft skills and how to push back and know that they've got the same rights as every other child, because education is supposed to be free and fair for everyone. That's all I got to say. Sorry.
No, sorry, Christi. I can see from the faces, I can see people see what I see with when they see you, that it's really just like mind-blowing, all that you have had to face, and that you keep moving forward, and that those are tragedies that I think a lot of people would have given up and would not have persevered, let alone kept getting more and more education and making things like the self-improvement journey that you've been on is mind-blowing. And
that was because my love for my son did not die when he died. And I wanted to see what it was like if somebody loved me enough and fought for me enough, what the outcome was going to be. And that's why I'm still doing it. Because again, had I had that, I probably would have prevailed a lot sooner. So it's my love that allows me to push through the fear, to be honest with you, Amy.
that's beautiful. Nikki, did you want to say something before we go to Wairimu?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. So yeah, I just wanted to first of all, like, thank you for sharing that, both Louise and sorry, my brain isn't working right now.
It's a lot to process.
Louise and God, why is my brain not working? Louise and Christi, sorry about that. My brain is like frozen. But also I wanted
It's trauma. That's why it's frozen.
That's what it is. But also, like, just hearing, like, like you say that it is changing, and like I agree that there has been some positive changes, but like, if we have time later, I'll share some kind of like newer experiences I've had that it's like they still like are punishing me for things that happened 10 years ago. And it's like, as a parent currently with those public school systems and just how that is happening, preventing me from being available to my nieces, demonizing criminal, like, attempting to demonize and label my 5-year-old son who was mistakenly playing a game of tag as violent, right? Within his first week of kindergarten. I mean, the language that they use to describe children nowadays and their parents, right, is just so atrocious. It's not changing fast enough. And I know change is always too slow coming, but it's like, how many generations of families and children have to be harmed by these systems before we actually listen to people and actually make change,
That is so nicely put. It is really overwhelming to just think about all the ways we continue to victimize victims. We hurt people, and then when they respond to that hurt, we keep on piling on the blame and the problems and difficulties. It's a system that's not really working for anybody. Our last sort of panelist today is Wairimu Macharia, and I am so excited to have her speak about this. One of the things that's been so great in being her friend is that she does bring a perspective, like a fresh perspective. She didn't come with expectations of the school and of the service and of the culture. She just came and is observing, and some of her observations are really mind-blowing, and just the perspective of looking at it from it doesn't have to be this way, there's other ways of doing things, has been so valuable to me that I thought she would be a great addition to really share how she's seen things play out. And she does have like global experience to be able to recognize that there's not just one way. We're not always right. We don't have all the answers, and our belief that we do is really disconnecting us from so many people's lived experience. Wairimu, floor to you.
Yeah, at times I don't even know what to do with such an introduction, like just sit back and smile and be happy. But I'm so happy to be here today. Amazing, an amazing platform to be in. Thank you, Christi, Louise, who I happened to graduate on the same day for parent advocacy with. Nikki, we've interacted in the past as I worked with DPH as a consultant. So I'm very happy to be here and thinking that we are talking about something that happens every minute, every moment, even right now as we speak, because trauma is all about triggers and flashbacks. It's funny because there's a recreation of that. Just when you think you're done with one phase, there's a trigger that's going to like beautifully usher you to your next phase. So I say beautifully because it's gotten to a point where I'm very big on venting spaces and, you know, motivational speaking, where you just we try to encourage each other to just have our head above the waters, because it's I don't even know what word to use about the world out there, because every single day you just have to survive, you know? So when it comes to trauma, so let me just first introduce myself. I'm Wairimu Macharia, and I moved to this country with my children end of 2019 in December, so just prior to the pandemic. But it's important to note that I was here since 2003 to 2010 for school. So I was exposed to, you know, the country and the culture, but in a very different, you know, footing. I was single, I didn't have children. So come 2019 and everyone is thinking, oh, you've been there, done that. It's not going to be a big issue for you. Shock on me, because clearly it was a totally different ballgame. And I'm supposed to be this go-to person to my children. By then there was 7, 5, and 3. And I'm supposed to be this ninja, but I'm now in a system where I'm as green as them. Why? Because I had no experience with children here. Anyway, good thing is there's settings like parent information. You can go get your children into school. But even as we speak of trauma in any angle, from every speaker here, and I believe from every person here, I'm going to share like a short video with different slides later so that we can also share our insight and our thoughts on that. But I believe it's always about gaps, because if it wasn't about gaps, we wouldn't even be having this discussion. There's a gap somewhere. So fast forward, they only get to go to school for 3 months. And I'm still struggling to know about what is accessible to me, what's not accessible to me, because truth be told, there isn't that structured receiving, type of organization for even immigrants or it also depends on whether you're exposed or not. I'm just thinking of someone who's here who can't speak English and all that, and who's also not able to be maybe proactive, because what I did is when I got here, I didn't know where to start because my background is in peace and conflict resolution. I didn't even know how to start applying for jobs. So what do? I go to Facebook, and up there on the search type nonprofit organizations in Worcester. And the first thing I see is the Trauma Tuesdays that happen every Tuesdays at where you used to meet physically, Amy.
Worcester Area Mission Society.
Exactly. And I see the next upcoming date and I show up. I just didn't know who I'm going to find. I didn't even know anybody. But now imagine someone who cannot even do that, because that was the beginning of me knowing who to see, who to go to. But still, it wasn't enough because this is not an everyday access for me. Now, pandemic hits, and then I'm with the 3 children. They're also struggling with language barriers. They're also trying to figure out, what do we do with this winter? We've never experienced this. It's in, I'm originally from Kenya. It's a totally outdoor scenario, but here there's a lot of things you cannot do. Like, it's a different kind of experience for them. So fast forward, during the pandemic and everyone was struggling with the remote learning, I have 3 children, all of them, including a head starter, is on a gadget, and they all have to be in school at the same time. So my daughter is busy playing with a doll because she's thinking this is too much for me. But there's a STAR test going on, and the teacher texts me and goes like, hey, I don't know why Liana is not on screen anymore. So I rush from my other son's room to come and see what's going on here. And I find her playing with a doll. And it was a struggle. I mean, I didn't turn off the cameras or anything. It was a struggle to try and convince her mama, let me have this doll and I'll give it to you. First do your test and then we can take it from here. And it was a physical struggle, but just what you would do, any mother would do to try and get the doll from her hands. The next thing I know, DCF is on my door, that I physically abused my daughter, and I'm still trying to figure out, should I be in this country or not? And according to me, I didn't know much then about DCF, but I thought my world was over, and I'm not going to see my baby again, and all these things are going through my head. Yet the same teachers I know, and that's the time I learned about mandated reporting. I'm just learning about this. And the same teachers are the same ones you have been telling that you're struggling. Is there an alternative to this? Can they even go to school on Monday and we rest on Tuesday as we figure this thing out? So for me, the introduction to the entire thing, even to the school that my children was going to, I felt extremely disconnected. I mean, as I said earlier, I'm huge on venting spaces. So that should tell you I talk. I'm able to express myself. I'm able to reach out. I'm able to cry as much as I want to. But now it was huge for me. But at that particular moment, and that's why talking about trauma is important, I realized it wasn't even about that moment. It was about baggage that you've carried over and over again. For me, this was an invalidation platform, and I had gone through invalidation for so many years in my life. And at the same time, these children that I had, I came to realize that was the only thing. As much as I was carrying a lot of responsibility, I was even a part-time lecturer, I was busy in the community, but I realized these children were the only things I ever felt that I was really good at. Why? Because there was reciprocated validation. And at that time, it's at that time that a lot of things came out. So what I'd like to say at that particular point is, at times it's harder said than done. But there are certain situations that in your life, there are certain storms in your life, even those traumatic events that don't necessarily come to shake you up and destroy you. It can be a wake-up call. And for me, at that point, that was my wake-up call. Like, hey, you need to deal with the past, because if you think it's going to get any easier, it's not. So what about, how are you going to handle the next big thing that comes your way? So with that said, I know most of the time we talk about self-care, but I have a huge problem with that, because when you tell someone, you know what, you need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your children, you need to be a better person, you need to love yourself, you need to be kind to yourself. But what supporting systems or environments are there for you to have that self-care? Are you living with people who understand that you might just need to walk away from those children and not be a bad mother for 2 days or 1 day? Are you around an environment that allows you to just express yourself and not necessarily be labeled as someone who is vulgar or doesn't know how to talk to her children? And again, I also want to make this disclaimer that with parenting, it goes both ways. As we speak of trauma, of course, we are not excluding our men here, because it's both ways. Because it's an unfortunate situation, because even in this meeting, of course, we have more women than men. But it's just, again, we go back to society, how they've been nurtured. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to not be able to, expose, because that shows you're weak. But this is something they also go through. And the other, what was profound to me is, I would like for us for a moment to think about the flip side of events. We talk of generational trauma, and we think of it in a negative way. But also, if you have had a childhood that is better than what you're offering your kids, for example, you had everything you ever needed in your childhood, but now in your adulthood, you're not in the same platform to offer exactly that to your children. That also I have come to realize, because that was my story at some point. It created a lot of pressure for me, and not being in touch with yourself and not accepting your situation, because now that makes you have expectations that are not real, and also have the same expectations. And now it just trickles down. It trickles down to your children. And if you may allow me, let me try and share, because I know, Amy, you gave me permissions. Let me see if I can share a few slides. Yes, I'm trying here. So if I'm gonna select a window, so it's on the screen.
I did not know that about the DCF piece, and that is really, really.
Yes, it was quite something. So if you can help me out here, Amy, I don't know why it's not giving me an option.
It usually should say screen share, and then it'll show you a couple choices of things you could share. Oh, there you go. You got it.
There? Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
All right, let me see if I can. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's let me try and
I can't hear it though. There might need to be a
No, it has no voice.
Silent. Okay,
yeah,
great.
It is just it's just the screenshots of this. So I want you to if you read this statement, if you do a good job raising your kids, you will end up spoiling your grandkids. But if you spoil your kids, you will end up raising your grandkids. I just want a couple of, like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you read that? What's your first reaction? Just even on the chat, just a few responses. What's the what do you feel from this? What do you get from this? Irritation, guilt. And allow me very fast, Nikki, why would you say irritation?
Because I feel like it's like, no matter what you do, it's like, you know, and like even the term spoiling. So like spoiling, like, can be this really overused term of like, you know, even just recognizing your child as an independent human with their own wants, desires, and showing up for them in the way that they ask us to, right? So like that can be classified as spoiling, right? Or like, even you hear often, like, I remember when I first had my daughter, it's like, you shouldn't pick her up right away when she cries, you're spoiling her. And it's like, no, she's 2 months old and she's nursing, she needs to eat, right? But it's this very much like, no matter what you do, it's going to cause harm, right? And it's like, it's just irritating that, like, you know, that's not like, well, that isn't true.
Yeah.
But these things are thrown around so frequently that, you know, people that don't know anything about parenting are often then resharing these, and, you know, and
Yeah.
it's
The reason,
frustrating.
yeah, thank you. The reason I shared this is because we, just like trauma, you know, everyone has an opinion, and this is very relative. And unfortunately, this is something this is a meme that's going around, and it's accessible to just anyone. It's accessible to someone who probably relies on the internet to try and see if they can make a better life for themselves or understand life. So what does this do? And the reason I brought this is it all ends up with self-awareness and just being comfortable with you and what your understanding is. Because for me, it can be very borderline, you know, patronizing. It's a lot of things here, but from the person who wrote it, if they were to verbally explain it, they would define spoiling in their own way, just like Nikki talked about it. So even when you translate this to the trauma end, if you do a good job raising your kids, I mean, it depends. From what angle am I coming into parenthood in? At what point am I being a parent? Am I do I have some issues? What's my mental space? What's my physical space? And who are you to define what spoiling is or what raising my child is, you know? So this is some of the societal expectations and radars that have greatly contributed to trauma going on from generation to generation, because they try to define what life is. And I don't think that's acceptable. I mean, there's the common ground that we stand on, and it mostly lies on like human rights. I mean, harming someone and all that, but not such. So we'll go to the next one. So every single person you meet is either repeating a cycle of generational trauma or carrying the burden of breaking the cycles. But I also like to add, there's also an in-between who probably has been lucky enough to have someone who's repeating the cycle make sure it doesn't go to them. So they won't have an experience of that trauma at all. There's normally that in between. The next one, I would like us to probably share a bit of insight on this. Trauma is not what happened to us. It is what happened inside of us as a result of what happened to us. It's also at the same way I would ask, do we agree with this statement? Because when I was thinking about it on my end, because at the same time, the way I have my children back to back, I didn't even realize it was the reason why, although I know unconsciously I already had projected, you know, at times you have these plans that you have for yourself. I probably out of your head, I don't want children, like I would share my end. I knew I didn't want children maybe after the age of 40. And not because I had, you know, it's just one of those societal norms that you unconsciously pick up on. However, by the time I got to getting to be a parent, at that particular point when I realized unconsciously that's the only thing I was good at, I wasn't going to stop, because it's like unconsciously you're thinking, if this is all I'm good at, then why not? I'll just go on and have babies because this is the only ground. And until something had to snap me back into reality, like you need to deal with what you're facing. You need to deal with you know, issues of betrayal. And that's another angle. And I know I had that conversation with Amy. At times when we talk of trauma, it's not all about, you know, the rape cases or sexual abuse or physical abuse or emotional, you know, but issues that we live with every single day, depending on the environment you're in, issues of betrayal, issues of infidelity, issues of deception. You know, at times those have a huge role that they play on even how we get to raise our children, even our parenting. And you know, when you talk about those, there's a tendency of the society brushing it off like, oh, that's normal, you know, that's a way of life, you'll get over it. But what you don't realize is each one of us have a very different way of receiving incidents or situations in your life. And those are, when it comes to emotional, even when it comes to emotional abuse, it's the same inclination where it's looked at in some areas, it's looked at as a lesser, you know, injustice than physical abuse. But it's so compelling when it comes to our everyday living. So these things, it's so frustrating to have people belittle any kind of experiences that we have. The next one would be this. I would skip the first bit because that's the slide that we shared before. This trauma embeds itself in the body, affecting not only our emotions, but also our brain's ability to function. Trauma is any experience of threat, disconnection, or immobilization to the nervous system. It results in the dysregulation of your mental, emotional, spiritual, and bodily health. And just as Christi was talking earlier, this reflects on the fact that how you express yourself just because of the trauma you've had, it's unfortunate because the same systems that should be defining it for you, even clinically, is the same system that now defines you otherwise, defines you on the other side of even, you know, at some point I was looking at Christi and I'm like, you must have been looking at them like, are you talking about me or someone else? Like, are you defining me or somebody else? Because it's something that affects our every single aspect of living, our thinking, our reactions, and even how, and now that we're talking about parenting, even the children that we are raising right now, it's just that self-awareness. And what I would like from this, what I would like to challenge all of us is, for us who are in such forums and we are aware and we know that there's need for sensitization and awareness, it's a person at a time. Are we able to have those eyes that, because we've walked through these journeys, you can easily identify someone else who's going through that and encourage them that it is okay not to be okay. It is okay to now come to a place that you want to know you. Because the other thing is, we need to also realize that at times we have to be realistic. We have to be brutally honest with ourselves. At times, the trauma that we carry, we need to have an awakening of some sort. And I'll give a personal experience. I have struggled with procrastination for so long. I have struggled with this having been raised up very cushioned, you know, parents who make sure that there's no harm coming your way. And at times it goes on until you're an adult, until the time when you have to face your own home, your own children, your own setup. Truth be told, this might sound, you know, like it's one of those things I say, I'm comfortable saying I probably grew up in my 30s simply because I used to have this mentality of, so long as you're a good person, as long as you treat people right, as long as you know that you're not breaking any laws, as long as you know that you're trying to live right, that is exactly what comes your way. And imagine, just have a moment to reflect, at what point did you realize that and reconcile with that fact that it doesn't matter what I do, but at the same time, I need to realize that I do not have control of what other people do. I do not have control of how someone decides to treat me. And truth is, when we say someone, it starts from the very closest person to you, your mother, your father. There should be no expectations that you have control. And those are the hard truths as we grow, as we move into different phases in our lives that we need to face. So when you reflect after you get to learn that, you realize you have a lot of self-development to do. So are you being brutally honest with yourself so that even in these traumatic situations, you're taking the next step to better yourself as a person, so that maybe what comes your way will no longer be a trigger, will no longer be a flashback, but just a situation that you need to deal with then. Because look at it, there's two things, and probably they'll come at the end of the slide just to read, but I'll talk about them now. There's what we call emotional immaturity, and that can come from many arenas, even from mental health. However, as long as we can challenge ourselves every single day for self-development, some of these things, and even an issue that might sound so petty, like people pleasing, that's a huge contributor to trauma. It is a huge contributor even to your parenting. And I'll share a slide towards the very end, because you'll be shocked how much as a people pleaser, it can even affect your parenting and the way you raise your children, you know? So the next slide, ways trauma can show up in parenting. So in instances I just remembered this slide even as Nikki was speaking, when you were talking about even as you raise your children, and then at times we have those internal radars because you're so tensed up. If you have pre-existing scenarios, like I'm hoping I get this right this time. If I didn't get it right in college, I better get it right in parenting. If I didn't, depending on what you've had to go through in your life. So your child's age triggers the trauma that you experienced at their age. You expect your child to meet your emotional needs. At times it's hard to form a natural bond. At times you have difficulty regulating yourself when your child is dysregulated. And at this point, I'll also share a bit as days have gone by. So remember, I said we moved here, and we've also been, most of the time for immigrants, you also have our reunification is step by step, because at times the immigration takes time to file your papers, and the pandemic didn't make it any easier. It's a global issue. They're so backtracked. So my husband hasn't been able to join us, so it's just me and the kids, but we do all it takes to be able to talk. But for one of my sons, it's been very, very hard, and he's become highly sensitive. And when it comes to the system, Christi, in schools also, I believe there's still so much to be done as far as accommodating these children, because some of them are neither here nor there as far as even clinically, there's no clinical interventions for them. But even as a parent, you're proactive to make sure the teacher knows I hope we're on the same page. You call for meetings, but every single evening, your son has a story as if you never discussed that issue. And you wonder, what else are you supposed to do? And those are the gaps that I talk about. As much as we go through advocacy platforms, we go through different programs. I personally, I'm not at 100%. I probably am not even at 60% of knowing my resources around here, but at least I know some that I use. But still, it stops at your child getting that experience from school. The other thing is try joining an online community or start your own. At times you expect your child to act like an adult, and your child's emotions lead to certain actions in you that you do not understand. I know I've had to go through that over and over again. But again, let's always retreat to the self-awareness button that we always have to press, and encourage others to do so. And I'll go back to what I stated earlier. I know self-care is there, but are we ensuring whoever we are telling self-care, have you told them, okay, learn to have some self-care? Do you need me to look after your son? Or do you just leave it as have some self-care? Okay, kindly go to the next level, take some self-care. And then what I normally do is ask, do you have an idea how you would like to do that? And then they let you know, maybe I just want to go for a massage. Okay, what would make you go for it? What would make you not go for it? I don't have someone to look after my son. I might not be able to do it, but what are our contacts? How far have we gone as the community? You know, and as I always say, it's a step at a time. Let me do that for just one person, and it's okay. You don't have to do 100, because it's only in the hope that that is going to cause a ripple effect, you know? The other thing, and this is just maybe, I think 3 more slides, how generational trauma might show up in your parenting. We've gone through this with the previous speakers about the fear, the guilt, being overprotective or controlling your kids, overcompensating by giving kids everything they want. We have to be careful about that. In fact, in this sense, define your own journey, so long as you're defining your own journey. Because this, as much as we go through this, I said again, this is relative. Some of them you have to pick up, some of them you don't have to pick them up. But again, you have to define in your own journey what that means. Overreacting to small mistakes, being obsessed with academic success. Again, if you came from a household that is all that mattered, your emotional, your social well-being was not, you know, much of a consideration, then you find that you carry that on, and not trusting others to care for your kids. I know I had to work on letting go. I know, and this is not even to strangers or to daycare programs. No, even in your own household, your brothers, sisters, when you're so clingy, I revert to what I said. I came to realize that was my therapy, and it wasn't going to be helpful for my children because I wasn't viewing them. I would have missed their stages of growing up or development because I'm busy just using them as my therapy. And then the last few ones would be ways to avoid passing on generational trauma. We've talked about them, but I'll just mention them quickly. Talk to kids in age-appropriate ways. Work through your trauma by speaking about it with therapists, friends, and support groups. Create an open dialogue. I'm big on venting spaces about mental health in your family, including how mental health services have helped you or not helped you, you know, because it goes both ways. And again, there's the stigma also, where we can be able to talk about general inclinations, but let me tell you, Amy, today's platform, speaking from personal experiences and journeys, I cannot even find the right words because that speaks to someone. Someone told me the other day that your experiences are totally useless unless you share them with people, because that's the only way they're going to it's going to give your life meaning. We talk of meaningful living. So what are you doing to make your life meaningful? Engage in meaningful projects and traditions with your kids that they'd be proud of to pass on one day. Seek out family therapy. Recognize harmful patterns in your own parenting and your own solutions. Just make it authentic. Now, things to remember about trauma, it's not your fault. However, I'll coin that it's not your fault with a personal sense of responsibility and awareness. Let's all, just be at the forefront of being able to deal with hard truths about ourselves. It's the hardest thing to do, to be so honest and brutal with yourself. And then it's not a sign of weakness. It can be permanent scars. Everyone's response to trauma is different. And again, very relative. Trauma experiences can happen to anyone, and you can get professional help. Each person's trauma is valid. Emotional immaturity, we spoke about that. And this is the slide I wanted to share with you. Parenting as a people pleaser. Remember, this is the trajectories that you portray. Constantly feeling the need to swoop in and protect your children, trying hard to make everything fair and equal between siblings, neglecting your own self-care and mental health because you're constantly worried for others and theirs, feeling the need to constantly entertain your child so that they don't suffer from boredom, having trouble saying no to your child, not to disappoint or upset, feeling the need to intervene when your child is struggling with frustrating but normal life events.
Mute. We're hearing a lot of background noise. If you haven't muted, we're hearing other people besides Wairimu. And I don't have the host privilege, so I can't just do that. Brenda. There we go. Thank you.
That's all right. So this, for me, I'll share a personal journey on this, because as I said, I got to a point where I had to deal with hard truths, and this was one of them. And I realized people would talk to me about it, even if it's, like people who cared about me. And I would easily get, like, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone. But it took me a journey of, self-reflections to identify exactly what, even prior to me being a parent, all that I carried forward. And it's, children are such a huge blessing, because they put you in a situation that you get to know you. It's like you're just a freshman in your own life, You're trying to figure out who you are, because you're also trying to give this child that you're responsible for a better platform to see things. And that's why we have to be very conscious about our journeys, even as we speak of trauma. So I believe this here is in regards to the emotional immaturity. This is just a thought by Pam Leo about emotional maturity or immaturity. There's the authoritarian parenting, which is based on the child's fear of losing the parent's love. And this is still, remember, when we're talking about the foundations of trauma, these are some of the issues that may come up even as someone is speaking of their traumatic events. I always wanted to please my mom. I always wanted to make her happy. She was always sad, so I didn't want to be, another sad event in her life, So permissive parenting is based on the parent's fear of losing the child's love. So what do you end up doing? Pleasing, being a parent pleaser, like a child pleaser. Then connection for parenting is based on love instead of fear. So, and I would want to turn this also to not just connecting with your children, but even as a society, as I put out the challenge earlier, are we connecting really? Are we there to be able to look out? As even as Nikki was speaking earlier, I was thinking about, times that she felt alone. And that's another area too that I normally like to talk about, even as we do the community conversations and dialogues. When there's a time when you're surrounded with people, but you still feel very alone. And whether you have had trauma before or no trauma, it's such a dark place to be in. But another challenge I'd like to place to you, it's in those moments that you get to know yourself. It's in those moments that you're able to, to be able to reach out and speak out. However, are we making sure that people feel that way when it comes to me and you? Are we making sure that people feel that they can be able to speak out, even in those alone moments? Because at times you're surrounded even with the people that you love the most, but you will still feel very alone, And it's only that I don't have the figures now, but there's a research that showed that most of the time people who have had trauma or who've been exposed to trauma, because at times there's a secondary trauma where you know, even as a child, probably you had to be with your mom or dad who had very traumatic events in their life, and you carry that with you. You'll be asked what happened to you. Nothing that I remember, but I know I saw it happen to somebody, and you've carried it with you. You create boundaries and walls just because you were exposed to trauma, to someone who had trauma. So let's try and make those connections. Just leave you with a couple of questions, and this is very rhetoric. At what point does your self-will kick in? At what point does that self-will kick in, you know? And let's be out there, not just giving solutions that are very, I don't want to use the term unrealistic, because what I mean is like almost plastic. And the example I gave is when you're telling people to it as well, or let me know if you're fine. Are you taking the next step to be part of them being okay? Even as we, you know, every person, the first slide we started, or the second slide we started with, it shows us how every single person has been exposed to trauma in one way or another. Thank you very much. And it's just been an amazing platform.
Thank you so much. That was great. I know those slides really were resonant for me, and I think probably for lots of other people. If you want to stop the screen share, we can kind of just see where everybody's at. Anyone who's been watching or participating, if you'd like to make a comment or give an observation, I'd love to hear it. It's definitely been a lot of information. It seems like it's been really applicable to many people here in the audience, and wanted to give you an opportunity to share.
I'll just thank everyone for sharing their stories, and like hearing your guys' personal experiences really just emphasizes why it's so important to continue learning about trauma-informed care and how to like keep that going and continue trainings for that in the future.
That was beautiful. Thank you. I also love, Wairimu, that you put connection as kind of the piece, right? We only have a few minutes left, and so trying to come up with solutions would just be an exercise in futility, sadly. And you said that, but for all of us that are just trying to get through it, it is about connection, and it is about, you know, that's our hope of this platform too, is that people won't feel like it's just them. They won't feel so alone. They'll see some of the injustices. Every time I hear about things that people have been gotten investigated for, DCF investigations, I know that that's so much about social location. There's definitely things that I've done as a parent that if somebody were scrutinizing me, I could have lost my child. And we know that there's really different treatment in how people are sort of policed in our culture and who's policed in our culture. And that has shown up for many parents, many women here today, and just in our community in general. And I don't feel super hopeful about the directions our country is going in, I'm sad to say, with some of the choices that they're taking away from, taking away a person's right to choose about their parenting status without giving them support to be a parent, just feels so abusive to me, regardless of people's religious beliefs or beliefs in we're not giving people the support they need to follow the rules we're making for them. And the harm that does to children is what just doesn't seem to be in the conversation. And that's the one piece I can't stop obsessing about, is these are people. Once they're born, they're still they're human beings who are going to have an experience. And if they're not getting what they need before they've even started, it doesn't bode well for their successful personhood. And that I just really feel like our culture does not seem to get how hard this is, how isolating, how little support, how much it is about trauma, all of that stuff. Tara, jump on in.
I just want to throw out there, Nikki, when you were talking earlier on the mental health piece. Now, I think all of us, right, have a foot somewhere in mental health, and Amy knows my story. But my oldest has pretty significant mental health issues. And my younger daughter was in the hospital for suicidal ideation. And the psychiatrist told me that if I didn't ask my oldest daughter to move out because she was such a trigger, that they were going to file on me. Now, how do you make a decision? She was 18 or 19, I'll say, not ready to move out, still my kid, still my responsibility, not able to, she has services now at 29. So obviously she needed services at 18, 19, 20 that she was declining because she thought she knew it all. But to have the psychiatrist and the social worker sit in front of you and say, your 15, 16-year-old is telling you that she's a trigger and this is what keeps bringing her here. If you don't ask her to leave, we'll file with DCF. And I said, go ahead, go for it, bring it on. I lived in Western Mass back then. This was the old Providence Hospital in Holyoke, which we had a couple of really good experiences with. So this was just a really bad yuck. But if these professionals are doing that in the mental health world, that are supposed to wrap around and support your family. And I was working as a family partner at the time. I knew the system in, out, back and forth. And to still have that said to me was just mind-boggling at the time. But I just want, it happens. I was a professional working in the mental health field. And this is what a doctor and social worker are saying to me.
Your story, everybody's story too, just really does highlight that we do not have the resources, right? Like when Nikki said, like, I need a break from my kid, I called my husband. I'm thinking, thank God she had somebody to call. Many people in our community can't get the help they need unless they're willing to give up their kids. What kind of choice is that? It's absolutely not okay. Nikki, you want to close us out?
Also wanted to add that so much of what we do is not treat children as children. And I think about, for example, like my son, when he was like transitioning into kindergarten, it was right out of the pandemic, right? He had not had any access to preschool or, school prior to that, right? It was a brand new school. On top of that, coming out of a pandemic with a new student, right? Like all of these things. And it was like this expectation that he was going to know how to behave immediately upon entering the building, and that they were going to send him to the principal's office if he didn't like comply with their directions. And it's like, and also do 2 hours worth of homework every night with a kindergartner. So I was like, so not doing that. Like he's 5. But everything was so punitive. And then it's like, so we traumatize kids, make them feel like they're not doing enough, villainize and demonize parents. And actually, when we look at other models for other countries, like we shouldn't be having 5-year-olds doing homework and reading and judging them based on second grade comprehension skills, right? And so at one point, the teacher kept sending my son to the principal's office, and my 5-year-old says to her, like, because they were walking down because he wouldn't listen, and he says to her, Miss LaPafia, we should really just be celebrating the small gains that I did make today, right? And she looked at him like, oh, yeah, we should, right? And it's like, but why does my 5-year-old know that, right? But not their kindergarten teacher, right? Why are we making kids leave spaces and punishing them? Because they're not falling in line with what, it's just so backwards. And even, there was like an incident where it's like they labeled him as violent. And I was like, you need to take that off of, so like the teacher went to like move him and he pushed her hand away and she said he tried to slap me. And I was like, okay, well, did you ask him if you could touch him? Like, number one, right? Well, no, but he was unsafe and he was grabbing it. And I said, okay, well, he didn't punch you in the face. He's 5, right? And he's a young Latino boy in the Worcester school. So I'm going to ask that you take the word violent out of his kindergarten permanent school record now, because that next year you'll be expelling him based on something that wasn't even violent. Like, what is happening right now? And so many of us don't even know. And they kept demanding I come to the school, which I did. And thank God I had the flexibility with my job, right? But so many others would have been like, I can't do that. I have to work. I have to, right? And it's like, we put these really unfair barriers. And part of me, I should have probably just said, F off, right? Like, I'm not coming. I'm doing other things. Your job as educators are to educate them, like my son, right? And help them learn what's in school, right? That's part of their role. But part of my own trauma made me be like, felt the need to run over there and justify everything that he did. And like, I'm sorry that he cut up a paper and it wasn't a cutting activity. Like, you know, and it's like all of these things that I like jumped around and danced around at. And it's like, how about we don't leave scissors on the desks of 5-year-olds? Because, you know, I'm going to tell you, even me during this meeting felt the need to cut up at a paper that was sitting on my desk because I'm, you know, like to fidget with my hands and there's scissors available, right? So like, why is there the expectation that my 5-year-old does it, right? But it's like my own trauma led me to be like, my God, I have to go. And I'm sorry, my son's not perfect and he'll behave better. And it's like, at the end, I was like, no, he won't. He's 5 and we'll all adjust, right? Like, but it's like, you know, again, thankfully I had the ability to do that. But the reality is he probably would have been expelled had I not been over there every day, advocating for them to put a sensory room in the kindergarten room. Who would have thought that was such unique thinking, right? Like they have it in every kindergarten room, right? But you know, it's like our trauma makes us over respond like that, and then our kids get used to that over responding, which then gets more, you know what I mean? So it just kind of creates this
the cycle it creates of unrealistic expectations without the supports and skills to meet the expectations.
Yeah.
And then it comes judgment and punishment.
Mhm.
Great, that's really not working. And we pretty much everyone has been able to contribute to how the system isn't working for us. It's time to get some new systems, USA. We're not doing a good job and we're really harming people, and we are not giving people help when they've been harmed. And if that's the message people get, good, that's what they need to hear, because cut it out. Let's do something differently. I am deeply grateful to all of you for being here, for all of you for still caring about this stuff. And this is hard. It's really, really hard, because I know everyone here has been harmed, and harmed in ways that might never be fixed. But we keep showing up and doing our best. And the best thing we can do is to do it together and to try to support each other's voices and lift them and keep calling attention to injustice, because that's what this is. This is where injustice starts in kindergarten. Injustice starts pre-birth for many of our children. And that's not the world I want to live in. And I know that's not the world a lot of you want to live in. So thank you so much for everything you do to try to make it just a little bit better. You are needed now more than ever. This concludes our deep dive on trauma and parenting. Thank you all so much. Our speakers were amazing, and it's such a gift. Thank you.
Thank you.